In the Vatican Archives, every person is registered, every archivist, every researcher, every visitor. Names are logged, hours are recorded, access is tracked, except for one. In the early 1950s, an internal audit revealed a discrepancy so small it almost went unnoticed. A name appeared repeatedly in access records across several decades. The same handwriting, the same authorization level, the same initials. But there was no birth record, no employment file, no retirement date. According to the logs, the man had been entering the lower archival levels since the late 19th century, and he had never left. At first, administrators assumed the entries were just a clerical mistake. Old ledgers were often reused. After all, names were repeated, ink faded and was rewritten. But when the records were cross-checked against maintenance schedules, letting logs, and key circulation lists, the anomaly only deepened. The keys assigned to this archivist were still active. They were still being used. Several night guards independently reported seeing a man in dark, old-fashioned archival clothing walking the lower corridors long after closing hours. He never spoke. He never acknowledged them. He never triggered any alarms. Cameras would mysteriously fail whenever they were pointed in his direction. Those who tried to follow him all said the same thing. He always turned a corner. That simply did not exist on the official floor plans. One guard described watching him step into a narrow passage between two stone shelves. When the guard reached the spot just seconds later, there was only a solid wall. The earliest written mention of this archivist appears in a private letter dated 1897. A senior curator wrote about a quiet man who works too late and asks no questions. He was described as polite, precise, and excessively familiar with sections that should have been restricted. Over time, similar descriptions appeared in the margins of reports, in personal diaries, and on unsigned notes. Always the same traits, always the same quiet presence. He was never assigned a desk. He was never listed on the payroll. He was never mentioned in official meetings, and yet, manuscripts he supposedly handled were found perfectly restored. Pages were reorganized. Catalog errors were corrected. Someone was doing the work. In the 1970s, a researcher accidentally left a recorder running overnight in a sealed manuscript room. 4 hours. The tape contained nothing unusual, just the low hum of ventilation and the distant creak of ancient stone. Then, at precisely 2:17 a.m., footsteps, slow, measured, unhurried. Paper moved, a book opened, a page turned, then a voice, not speaking words but reading, softly, carefully. When the researcher returned the next morning, the recorder was still running. The room was empty, but the manuscript on the table was open to a page that had never been cataloged before. It contained handwriting that matched none of the known scribes, and in the margin, written in faded ink, were 4 words, still not finished. After that incident, several senior archivists quietly requested transfers. Others retired early. One disappeared entirely from Vatican employment records. But the logs continued, year after year, decade after decade. The same initials, the same access pattern. Who was this archivist? A man forgotten by history? A clerical error that somehow became self-sustaining? Or something else, something bound not to time, but to the archives themselves? Some believe the Vatican didn't dismiss him because it couldn't. Others believe it didn't want to, because the archivist wasn't just guarding the documents, he was maintaining something far older than paper. And if he ever stops, whatever he is keeping in order may no longer remain contained. By the early 1980s, the strange stories about the unknown archivist could no longer be ignored. Too many people reported the same things. Too many records lined up in ways that just didn't make sense. Security tried to find him using old photographs from different decades, but there were none. In group photos of the archive staff, there were just empty spaces where someone should have been standing. They saw shadows without bodies, reflections in glass that didn't match what was in the room. One administrator noticed something even stranger. The archivist never signed any visitor logs, but somehow, his access stamps were triggering internal systems. These were systems only authorized staff could use. Whoever or whatever he was, the archives recognized him as one of its own. Maintenance workers would find doors unlocked in sections that needed multiple special keys to open. They'd find lights left on in rooms that hadn't been officially entered for years. Entire shelves were being reorganized with perfect precision, following a system that was ancient, one that no modern cataloging method used, and yet, it was brilliant. It worked. Books and texts that everyone thought were lost forever would quietly reappear in their correct places. Mistakes made decades ago were corrected overnight. New notes would appear in the margins of old books. written in ink that hadn't been made for a century. Someone was secretly protecting the integrity of the entire archive. One night, a security guard stationed near the lowest levels, the crypts, had an experience that made him quit his job. He said he saw the archivist standing completely still in front of a sealed cabinet. This cabinet held documents so secret, so classified, that even the most senior scholars rarely got permission to see them. The guard called out, but the figure didn't turn around. Instead, the heavy cabinet door swung open all by itself. Inside were several manuscripts the guard didn't recognize. They had no labels, no protective wrapping. They were just sitting there, as if they were waiting. The archivist reached out a hand, turned a single page of one manuscript, and then paused. According to the guard, the temperature in the room dropped instantly. The air grew thick and heavy. The lights dimmed, but they didn't flicker. And then, the archivist spoke, not to the guard, not even out loud. He spoke directly to the pages of the book. The guard described the sound as something impossible to forget. He said it sounded like someone reminding a thing what it is supposed to be. The very next morning, that guard resigned. He refused to explain what happened. During his exit interview, he only said one thing. He wasn't reading history. He was correcting it. This sentence was never put into any official record. It was found years later, handwritten in a private notebook, inside an abandoned staff locker. Further digging revealed another disturbing pattern. The archivist always seemed to appear near documents connected to strange disappearances, censored information, or sealed testimonies. Think about court trials that ended suddenly without a verdict, or witness accounts that just vanished from public history. He was drawn to texts that stopped mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted. In several cases, documents the archivist had apparently handled contained new notes in the margins. These notes didn't change the content, but they clarified it, almost as if they were restoring an original version that had been twisted or hidden over time. One scholar came up with a wild idea. What if the archivist wasn't a person bound to a single time period? What if he was a function of the archives themselves, an entity created by centuries of collected knowledge, memory, and secrets, a living, breathing corrective force, an embodiment of continuity? In 1994, a few administrators decided to run a controlled experiment. They deliberately misfiled a set of important documents in a restricted wing of the archives. The mistake was subtle, just enough to see if the internal audit systems would catch it. They waited. The next morning, the documents were back in their correct places. No alarms had been triggered. No entry logs showed any activity, except for one small detail: the same familiar initials, written in the same old-fashioned handwriting, at the same time of night. For the administrators who ran the test, this was the moment everything changed. They stopped asking who the archivist was. Instead, they started asking why he was still there. Because if the archives had created him, or at the very least, allowed him to exist, then his purpose was not to be discovered. His purpose was to continue his work. And they were left with one terrifying thought: if he ever stopped walking those corridors, the archives, and all the history it contained, might begin to unravel. As the years passed, the Vatican stopped investigating the archivist, not because the mystery was solved, but because every attempt to observe him more closely failed. Motion sensors would malfunction. Cameras recorded empty corridors mere seconds before and after he appeared. Audio equipment captured the sound of footsteps, but there was never a source. It was as if the archives themselves decided how much of him could be seen. One internal memorandum from 2001, which was never meant for public eyes, described the situation in plain, stark terms. The anomaly does not resist observation. It simply does not respond to it. From that point forward, the staff were quietly instructed not to interfere. New archivists received a subtle, unspoken warning during their orientation. It wasn't an official policy, but a tradition passed down through hushed whispers. If you hear footsteps behind you at night, do not turn around. If you notice a door ajar that should be sealed, do not enter. If a document appears to have been corrected without any explanation, do not ask who did it. Most followed these unwritten rules. Those who didn't left. One researcher in the early 2000s, driven by a dangerous curiosity, attempted to confront the archivist directly. According to a colleague who later recounted the story, she followed him down through 3 levels of the lower stacks until he finally stopped beside a shelf of unclassified manuscripts. She spoke first, her voice breaking the ancient silence. "Who are you?" The figure did not turn, but the air around them changed, becoming heavier, almost compressed. The lights overhead dimmed, casting long, distorted shadows. She later described the sensation not as standing in a room, but as standing inside a memory. The archivist answered her, but not with words. His lips never moved. Instead, an understanding flooded her mind. She suddenly knew things she had never learned. Dates of forgotten battles, names of erased figures, events scrubbed from the public record. And in that moment, she understood something else, something far more profound. The archivist was not a person. He was a process, a continuity mechanism, born from the sheer weight and accumulation of history itself. Every document sealed away, every testimony altered, every truth delayed, added pressure to the system, and something had formed to balance it all. The archives didn't just store knowledge, they generated it. And where knowledge concentrates for long enough, something begins to observe. After that encounter, the researcher requested immediate reassignment. She never returned to historical work again. In a personal letter to a friend, she wrote a chilling line: "He is not keeping secrets, he is preventing collapse." Later discoveries suggested a pattern. The archivist appeared most frequently during moments of great institutional stress, wars, political upheavals, periods when history itself was being aggressively rewritten by those in power. During those tumultuous times, activity logs showed a spike in movement within restricted areas. Documents were mysteriously reorganized. Corrections appeared in perfect ink, without attribution. It was as if the archivist was reinforcing the very structure of history from within. Some theologians proposed a disturbing theory, that the archivist existed outside of any moral alignment. He was not good, he was not evil, he was simply necessary. They argued that if too much truth were revealed all at once, the systems that govern our world would fracture. But if too much truth were suppressed, collective memory would rot from the inside out. The archivist maintained the balance, not for the Vatican, not even for humanity, but for the archive itself, a structure so vast, so layered with time and meaning, that it had begun to require maintenance beyond any human capability. By the 2010s, all written references to the archivist faded from the official records. They weren't erased, just absent. Yet, the staff continued to report the quiet signs of his presence. A chair moved from its place, a book left open to a specific page, a correction made in ink that was impossible to replicate. And sometimes, very late at night, a lone archivist walking through the lowest, most silent corridors would feel it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched, not with intent or malice, but with a profound sense of responsibility, as if something ancient and tireless was ensuring that the story of humanity remained intact. In recent years, the Vatican Archives have become quieter, not less active, but quieter in the way a forest grows silent before a storm. The official systems show nothing unusual, no unauthorized access, no unexplained activity, no missing files. Yet, those who still work the deepest levels describe a different reality. They speak of documents that feel heavier than they should, of shelves that seem to shift subtly when no one is looking, of rooms that feel occupied, even when empty. The archivist is rarely seen now, but his presence is felt more strongly than ever. Some believe this means his work is nearly complete. Others fear the opposite, that something within the archives has grown unstable. In 2018, a minor digitalization project uncovered a curious detail. Several manuscripts contained metadata timestamps that did not align with any known scan session. The files appeared to have been updated without ever being opened. When technicians traced the anomaly, they found a recurring marker embedded in the system, not a name, not a signature, a pattern. The same pattern that appeared in margin marks found on physical manuscripts. Dating back more than 100 years, the archivist had adapted. He no longer needed corridors. He no longer needed keys. The archive had changed form, and so had he. This discovery led to an unspoken understanding. Among senior staff, the archivist was not tied to stone, paper, or vaults. He was tied to record, to memory preserved against erosion, to continuity protected against manipulation, to history held together just tightly enough to keep it from tearing itself apart. One retired administrator summarized it best in a confidential interview. People think the danger is in revealing secrets. They don't realize the real danger is losing the thread entirely. If too many truths vanish, history collapses inward. If too many surface at once, it fractures outward. Something must remain in the middle, adjusting, correcting, maintaining coherence. The archivist does not decide what humanity knows. He ensures humanity remembers enough. And perhaps that is why the Vatican never attempted to remove him, because to do so would mean accepting responsibility for every consequence that follows. There are moments, late at night, when a lone archivist walks through the stacks and senses another presence, just ahead, not watching, not threatening, simply moving forward at a steady pace, keeping the shelves aligned, the records intact, the story unbroken. No one knows what will happen if the archivist ever stops. Some fear the archives would begin to decay rapidly. Others believe the true danger lies in what he has been quietly holding back. Because if the archivist exists to prevent collapse, then collapse must be possible. And if one day the corridors fall silent, if the footsteps no longer echo, if the pages stop correcting themselves, then history may finally be forced to remember everything at once. Until that day, the Vatican Archives remain stable, orderly, preserved, and somewhere within them, something that was never human continues to walk, not guarding secrets, but guarding the shape of history itself.